Kathleen Norris, in her book Amazing Grace, shares this story about a grandfather giving his grandson, Arlo, a Bible for a wedding present. Arlo greatly admired this Bible from his grandfather because it was an expensive gift. Bound in white leather, his wife and his name on the cover, the date of their wedding set in gold lettering on the cover. Arlo left that Bible in this fancy box that it came in, and he carefully placed it on the top shelf of their bedroom closet. For months afterwards, every time Arlo and his wife saw their grandfather, Arlo's grandfather would ask how they liked their new Bible. They had sent a thank you note saying how much they liked it, but Grandpa kept asking about it. How about those stories in Genesis, Arlo? Yeah, they were fascinating, Grandpa. Arlo, weren't those prophets brave? I can see how they inspired Martin Luther King Jr. Yeah, Grandpa, they were ahead of their time. At the time of their first anniversary, Arlo and his wife got a card from Grandpa and a note saying, I hope you're enjoying the Bible. So Arlo finally became curious, and he took the Bible out of the closet and found that his grandfather had put a $20 bill at the front of every chapter in the Bible. $1,300 in all. Valuable book, that Bible. Especially if you open it. Grandpa knew that. That story from Kathleen Norris's book, Amazing Grace, I told you that story because I want to tell you this one. It's about a middle-aged school bus driver who won the praise of her local police department because she remained calm when a deranged man took her bus full of mentally ill, handicapped children hostage. When asked by the reporters afterwards how she managed to talk the man out of using the gun he was waving in the air, she said, I pray a lot. Christian teaching teaches us that to trust the faith that is learned in practice in the discipline of prayer. This is something that this bus driver knew. Her answer to the reporter's question was not, I prayed a lot. She said, I pray a lot. In other words, she wasn't asking God to intervene at that moment in her life. God had already intervened in her life and was present even before she stepped on the bus that morning. It makes me think of how Jesus and how I believe that he was raised from the dead even before he was crucified. That's what allowed him to enter Jerusalem in the first place. That's what allowed him to say the things that he did and heal and teach in the way that he did, and the people that he lived with and hung with and talked to. He was already raised from the dead, from the fear. This bus driver was immersed in God because she praised a lot. She abided in the holy mystery and in the holy love of the universe, and this allowed her to be intimately in touch with that place of peace in the midst of crisis. Just as Jesus abided in God because he prayed a lot, not asking for anything in particular to happen, but instead of having a living relationship with the soul of this ever-evolving and loving universe. Prayer as a spiritual practice is something that helps us get on the bus each morning and respond to whatever comes our way. Prayer, meditation, affirming and accepting life as it comes to us frees us to live in hope and tap into the creative and healing power that is within the very heart of reality. within the very heart of us, in the very heart of the history of the story that's been given to us. Kathleen Norris writes of the life-changing experience that she had when she spent some time in a Benedictine monastery and learned this kind of praying from the monks. From one Benedictine friend, a gentle, thoughtful man who had been in constant physical pain for years and then confined to a wheelchair, she learned how he prayed. From him, Kathleen Norris learned that prayer is not asking for what you think you want, but asking to be changed in ways that you can't imagine. People who are in the habit of praying know that when a prayer is answered, it's frequently not in the way you expected it. For centuries, the people prayed for a Messiah, one who would lead them to freedom. Their prayer was answered, but not in the way they expected. How do we now, today, go about abiding in Jesus? How do we live into the resurrection, not as an afterlife experience, but as a this life experience? How do we immerse ourselves in the love of Jesus that was a threat to the oppressive powers, but a source of liberation for the people? I bring this question to the resurrection narrative in the gospel and see it as an invitation to live life differently. As the gospel reading this morning said, the women were Mary of Magdala, Joanna, and Mary the mother of James, who went looking for Jesus in the tomb. They went looking in the wrong place. They found that the tomb was empty, and the two angels said, "Why look among the dead for someone who is alive? Remember what he told you while he was still in Galilee. He said he's going to go ahead of you to Galilee, back home, transformed in new ways. This love of Jesus can't be contained within a tomb or held back by a stone. Love continues. Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. Where's Galilee? Galilee is that place where love and sharing are overcoming hate and greed. Where is Galilee? It's in Brussels. It's in Honduras, in Nigeria, in Tunisia, in Palestine, in Boys Hot Springs, and in this very room. Galilee is wherever women and men are gathered together, calling for peace and crying for the community to come together to care for one another. And we get to Galilee by trusting, by praying a lot, by affirming human dignity and taking care of each other, especially in times of crisis. Musicians know what it means to pray a lot. We call it practicing. And practicing becomes playing. Practicing becomes performing, acting in the world. Creating alignment between the better angels within us and the actions that we take and offer to the community around us. And in that daily practice, in that daily praying and playing, turning missed notes into right notes, turning disharmony into harmony, that daily practice becomes so intimate that miraculous things sometimes happen. People change and societies are transformed. I'm thinking about a story I read about the great violinist, Itzhak Perlman. was quite some time ago. Itzhak Perlman came on stage to give a concert at the Avery Fisher Hall, Lincoln Center, New York City. If you have seen Perlman in concert, you know that getting on stage is no small achievement for him. He was stricken with polio as a child, and so he has braces on both legs and walks with the aid of 2 crutches. To see him walk across the stage one step at a time, painfully and slowly, is an unforgettable sight. He walks majestically and painfully until he reaches the chair. And he sits down, slowly putting the crutches on the floor, undoes the clasp on his legs, tucks one foot back and extends the other foot forward. Bends down and picks up the violin, puts it under his chin, nods to the conductor, and proceeds to play. By now, audiences are used to this ritual. They sit quietly while he makes his way across the stage to the chair. They remain reverently silent while he undoes the clasp on his legs. They wait until he is ready to play. But this one performance, something went terribly wrong. Just as he finished the first few bars, one of the strings on the violin broke. You could hear it snap. It went off like gunfire across the room. There was no mistaking what that sound meant. There was no mistaking what he had to do. People who were there that night thought to themselves, we figured that he would have to get up, to put on his clasps again, pick up the crutches, and limp his way across the stage to find another violin, or else to find another string for this one. But he didn't do that. Instead, he waited a moment, he closed his eyes, and then he signaled to the conductor to begin again. The orchestra began, and he played from where he had left off. He played with such passion and such power and such purity as they had never heard before. Of course, anyone knows that it's impossible to play a symphonic work with just 3 strings on a violin. We know that. But that night, Itzhak Perlman refused to know that. You could see him modulating and changing and recomposing the piece in his head. At one point, it seemed like he was detuning the strings to get new sounds from them that they had never made before. When he finished, there was an awesome silence in the room. And then people rose and cheered. There was an extraordinary outburst of applause from every corner of the auditorium. People were there on their feet, and they were screaming and cheering and doing everything they could to show how much they appreciated what he had done. He smiled, wiped the sweat from his brow, and raised his bow to quiet us. And then he said, not boastfully, but in a quite pensive, reverent tone, you know, sometimes it's the artist's task to find out how much music you can still make with what you have left. The artist's task is to find out how much music you can still make with what you have left. This is the way of life for all of us. Here's a man who has prepared all of his life to make music on a violin of 4 strings, but who all of a sudden, in the middle of a concert, finds himself with only 3. So he makes music with 3. And the music that he made that night with just 3 strings was more beautiful, sacred, memorable than any that he had ever made before. So perhaps our task in this shaky and broken and bewildering and beautiful world is to make music. At first, with all that we have, and then when that is no longer possible, with what we have left. What did the women and the men who followed Jesus have left after he was crucified? They had this amazing notion that the Messiah was within them, was among them, in the way that they treated each other, in the way that they made sure that everyone was fed and cared for. How much music can you make with what you have left? Pray, practice, play. And for those of you who have seen Michael Moore's new movie, hammer, chisel, down. Roll away the stone. Rise up for love. Rise up for peace. Rise up for forgiveness. And rise up for justice. Let the people say,
Amen.